Okay, everyone, welcome back to another of Research Practices videos. So today we are going to focus on exploring some research approaches. And we're also going to, and this kind of falls under like the topic, one of the main topics, which is the purpose of research. Um, so with this one, our learning intention is to understand the importance and the role of research in today's society. What I should have added to that is we will also be developing an understanding of what qualitative and quantitative data is. Now, these words are going to become part of your both your vocabulary, stuff that we would expect you to speak about, as well as the stuff you write about. Because these are the two main approaches that you are going to essentially use in your research approaches for research practices and project. There will be a exit slip, but basically success is you um, to for you to show your understanding, and I will ask you to explain some stuff in your own words, just in the form of a little note somewhere that you can send to me. So let's move on. So first and foremost, when we're in class, we will do this. But I'll just show you. So we're going to talk about why is research important or unimportant, and I really want people to actually support their answer with a reason. So if you do not believe that research is important, why? What are some key industries that you think conduct research? What would our lives be like if we did not conduct research? And why do we need to research effectively? So, what are some of I suppose, the problems that could occur for using like poor sources of information, for example? Okay. Um, so these are all things that you need to consider. So basically, the key thing that needs to come out of this group discussion is that it's actually super, super important that we conduct research, and that this research is carried across multiple industries. Because without research, we do not know, like, how would we know how many people had depression? How would we know how many people, like, especially the stuff to do with COVID? There's no way to know those things. How do we know if a medication is going to impact X, Y, Z? Um, so, and then you got like research is literally conducted in every single industry that you can think of. There is research of some kind that is completed. So, it is incredibly important, and that's why we need to understand it. We need to understand its purposes, and we need to understand that using poor research methods or basing our some of our research off really faulty information can actually cause a lot of damage. So one of the key things that I will be discussing as part of this is basically I'm going to bring in some American politics here. So Donald Trump used to get some of his sources that he was basically telling everyone was super reliable, that actually weren't. And it actually caused a lot of damage, it caused a lot of angst, and there was actually quite massive global reproductions of some of the stuff he said. So this is why being well researched ourselves in just certain aspects of things that we find important, but also if you're going to produce any kind of written material, understanding how to identify and also how to research effectively is really important as well. So we have two main reasons that research is actually produced, or the purposes for them to be produced. So it might be that they want to gather information to discover, uncover, or explore. So something like that would be maybe someone wants to launch a new product, or it might be that you know a teacher wants to explore different ways of maintaining student attention in class or something. So there's all these things that can go into that. Descriptive is when you're gathering information, when you're describing details, and when you're summarizing things. So that all comes under information gathering. Then we come into theory testing. So theory testing kind of hits more of the scientific method stuff. So scientific, so the theory testing, it can be it can be medical fields, and it can be behavioral things. So it might look at something to do with or medical, especially as well. Um, but they've got explanatory, so they want to understand, or so we call it causal relationships. So we want to understand how these two things could potentially correlate or have a relationship between the relationship between two things, essentially. Or it might be that predictive. So really key one for predictive is say meteorology. So where they're predicting the weather for the next week. Okay, and so they're kind of our main two that we're going to explore today. This is a very, very lengthy quote, so I'm just going to read out some of the bits here. So this is why this is a quote from a University of Surrey in the UK. It is important because it's crucial for building knowledge, and it's only through reliable research do we begin to understand the complexities of issues, and it's about maintaining integrity and disproving lies through analysis of data. Okay, so data in the language of research practices and project can be as simple as information. It might be like, so for an example, when we say go collect data for your interview, that would mean you just need to go get the person's responses. So the word data will be used a lot in this as well. But I want to highlight, so research is a tool for building crucial knowledge so we begin to understand. So it's a tool for us to gain an understanding of a topic, and that topic can be anything. Okay, so it's really, really important, and across society as well as individually. Okay, moving on to research approaches. So we're focusing on two. So this is the qualitative and quantitative. Oh, sorry, I already did this earlier. So as a class, we will discuss what is already known. However, I just wanted to kind of get an understanding where people are and whether or not they've heard the words and what they think it means. But obviously, because this is a recording, we won't be doing that unless it's just me talking to myself, which is always weird. Okay, so we're going to start with qualitative research. So qualitative research is defined as basically conversational communication using open-ended communication and/or questions. So what this is referring to is information where you're asking people their opinions. So this could be through the form of um, an interview. It could be surveys where you ask them to go, please explain your answer. Or it might be anecdotal. So you're going to remember something and you're going to write about your experience. So all these types of things come under qualitative. It focuses on what people think, but also why they think it. So it's again, we're looking at the thought processes of people or your test subjects, which ideally you'd be looking at trying to obtain quite a few so you can kind of get a really good understanding of like a particular audience that you're trying to get. So these approaches are specifically usually designed to help reveal behavior or a perception. So the way this group of people think in reference to a particular topic. So I don't know if you've had people stop you on the street before, but they do exist. So a shop, for example, has stopped me before, and they were like, if you fill out this quick survey, I will give you a free pair of earrings. This happens a lot online now where they're asking for your feedback about what you think of their brand, what you think of the products, you know, and there'll be various things in there that where they're asking your opinion. But there's also, and I'll go through this in a lot more detail later. But what is usually also included in that is some really simple questions where you're not getting necessarily their opinion, but you're collecting the information about the person, and I'll explain why in a little bit why that stuff's important. Okay, so these are generally the methods that are used. So case study research, record keeping, process of observation. So observational research and ethnographic research are kind of similar. Um, I have created a separate PowerPoint that goes through some of these main ones. Um, uh, so especially things like focus groups, interviews, and surveys, which is not on here, but surveys kind of comes under, is somewhere in between focus groups and one-to-one interviews. Um, so there's a separate presentation that goes through what they are. And I'll also give some links on how to do some of them as well. Okay, when we're talking about strengths and limitations, so this is in reference to strengths and limitations of the data that you collect. So the actual information that you usually get from these. So strengths is that you can really be generalized and you can make assumptions based on the attitudes provided, um, and it's quite easy to analyze. You can be quite consistent and precise. And I have no idea why I have strengths and limitations written down the end there. That's hilarious. Let's ignore those. Okay, limitations though are that it can be it cannot be always accessible or available data, and it can be difficult to obtain. So if people don't participate, that can cause issues. So you might struggle to get, for example, if you're actually doing like a proper scientific study, um, minimum, minimum as usually is standard is a minimum of 1,000 participants. Obviously, that's not what you're going for, but for anything you are looking at that, the thousand people minimum, so you can get a reasonable pool of information with information that you can pull out that's based on experience potentially, but also you can pull out some statistical data as well. It can sometimes be difficult to understand, and it also you might not actually get the information, as much information as you need on your topic. And this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that the people you sampled just didn't understand. It might be so a lot of over the last year, what a lot of people faced was people just really didn't take completing those surveys seriously, so they found it difficult to actually use the information that they did get because people didn't treat it with enough respect. Um, Quantitative research. So this is the opposite. So qualitative, I'll just kind of rejig there. So qualitative is communication. So and it's usually quite casual. It can be quite casual, sorry, and you're collecting people's opinions. So you're collecting how do you feel, what do you think type of questions. And again, they're very open ended, which means that you want people to respond to them. You want people to give these. So if you're interviewing, you want people to go, I think and feel this because of this. So again, we want to know how they're thinking, we want to know why they're thinking. When we talk about quantitative, we are talking about numerical data. We are talking about numbers. So this is heavily used in science because to usually we want to kind of test a hypothesis. Um, so it is sorry. So it's concerned with precise measurements, replicable. Oh my God, sorry. Controlled and used to predict evidence. So what that means is if someone does a study, people can look at it and they go, okay, I'm going to do the exact same study using the exact same methods, all those things. They've got the controlled variables and all that in place, and they want to see if they can come up with the same information over and over again. And that's and that's usually what peer reviewing is, to be honest. So when you're talking about research stuff, peer reviewing is when people will review what you've done, checked how you've done it, why you've done it, and then sometimes other people will go off and test your theory for themselves. Um, and it's when it's become replicable and predictable that we know that it's a solid argument and that it makes sense. Usually, so this is where so the overall structure for a quantitative design is based in the scientific method, so meaning that it uses deductive reasoning. Um, so they form a hypothesis, um, and then they investigate a problem, and then they use the data collected from that investigation to form an analysis, which is where they gain their conclusions. So they analyze their data to either prove or disprove their hypothesis, um, and that is what we refer to as deductive reasoning and also the scientific method. So when you're talking about creating quantitative, you are talking about scientific method of approach. So these are kind of like the quantitative uh, research types. So experimental, correlation, descriptive, and survey. So with the survey one, I will be quite clear. So survey can go under qualitative as well. It depends on the style of survey you produce. What I would always recommend is when you do create a survey, you are actually doing a combination of both, um, like questions that you'll be able to produce statistical data from, as well as obtaining that qualitative, so that personal approach as well. What I mean by that is in your survey questions, and this is something you'll get to for your first assignment, when you're developing your survey questions, you do want stuff like in there, um, gender, and age. You might want, how do you feel about this topic? You do, which will give you some of the qualitative stuff, but you want some of that really simple yes, no, agree, disagree type of thing. So you can go, okay, well, 13% of respondents actually disagreed with this particular statement. What does that say? Okay, and you can do, we will be going through how to write effective questions in a separate presentation again. So strengths and limitations again. So some of the strengths are that it's usually a refined process. So and you can get decent quantitative data. You can get detailed information that explains some complex issues. So a lot of psychology, research in psychology and psychiatry actually use quantitative research. And there's also there's multiple methods on gathering information on very sensitive subjects. So this might be around mental health, it might be around some other elements like sexual assault or pedophilia or whatever it is. Limitations, though, can be that you cannot generalize, so you cannot just go, oh, well, it's roughly this proportion of the community. When you're talking about quantitative, you need to back up statements with numbers. So they need to be there so that people can go, okay, this is something that I can rely on. So if you see what's claiming to be a quantitative study and they've only their research that's backing up, so what they're saying is literally like, so they've pulled maybe 100 people, well, then I'm not going to say it's overly reliable. Um, it's definitely a little bit more difficult to analyze because usually the responses don't fit into like a lot of the boxes that we would call standard categories. and it's usually quite a time-consuming method of approach. So all those things and more. Let's ignore that one because I was supposed to delete it and I forgot. Okay, so what is the difference? What is the difference between qualitative and quantitative? Now, I have two kind of slides after this, which will go into a lot of detail. But basically, the difference is qualitative is, um, oh, so sorry, they differ in their analytical objectives, so the way they analyze their data, the types of questions asked. Now, this one is very key. So, a lot of the time, if you're asking questions to get quantitative um, data, you're asking very closed questions. They differ in the collection instruments, which it means the way in which they were collected. So, for example, as we learnt, the qualitative, you could do an interview, whereas the quantitative, you might do a bit more of experimental research. So it might be that you're going to go, okay, if I mix this chemical with this chemical, I predict this is the reaction I'm going to get. And this is why I think that's going to happen. Other things is the different forms of data they produce. So obviously, as we said, one's very personal, one's is very number based. So very cut and dry. You can't argue with a number. You can disagree with a person. And the degree of flexibility in the ways in which they are presented and stored. Continuing on, so I won't read these out, but these are here. So this is again looking at, say, kind of talking about what we were talking about. So descriptive data versus numerical data, open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, so on and so forth. And again, same thing, talking about the differences. So qualitative is to gain an understanding of motivations and reasons, whereas quantitative data is about generalizing and your sampling. So what I'll do, and I'm not sure how this is, I'm hoping there's no, actually there might be some copyright issues, so I won't actually play this. This is a video that's already on Daymap for you to watch, but this is also a YouTube video, so I won't play it because I'm putting this up on YouTube and I don't want there to be any copyright issues. But this also goes into a little bit more detail about explaining the difference, just in case you didn't understand. Okay, so the reason we are looking at this is simply because you will need to understand the difference in order to help you with your first assignment. Your first assignment, which I will I will be making another video on very shortly, will require you to understand the difference between open and closed questions, and understand what kind of information you think you need in order to answer your research project questions. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and I will see you all soon for the next video. Thank you.